This is a Synchronicity, Ayahuasca and Salvia divinorum 10x extract, trip report by Nowhereman, posted to erowid.org on June 11, 2003. I write this report because I want anyone who thinks about trying psychedelic chemicals to know that the mind does not simply return to normal after the drug wears off. The experience I describe is not a horror story. It is mostly positive, but it is also very strange. It is a story about the after effects of a psychedelic trip, about how a door in the mind can stay open long after the storm of the drug has passed. The storm shakes the foundation of the self, and the drafts of its memory keep moving through the hallways of thought, slipping into hidden corners. What I call a synchronicity began more than a year after the original drug session, and it lasted for about 3 weeks. It started when I smoked Salvia divinorum 10 times at the height of an ayahuasca ceremony. The details of that ceremony are recorded in Erowid's Salvia vault in a report titled Impossible. I will not repeat them here, but there is one part of that night that I did not understand until months later, and I want to include it now. During the Salvia portion, I felt that I was moving at angles that could not exist in ordinary three-dimensional space. I also felt that some part of my being was rotating, and that this rotation allowed me to travel along those impossible angles. While lying on a bed that was pressed against a wall, I began to roll in place, turning my body over and over while the wall stayed still. The rotation forced my body to pass through the same spot in space over and over again, as if I were tracing a line that loops back on itself. That motion is a familiar one. It is something that can be described with symbols if one has the right clues, even if those clues arrive much later. When I later looked at three-dimensional computer models of four-dimensional objects, such as a Klein bottle, I saw that the shape appears to pass through itself. In a projection, a four-dimensional being might seem to put a hand through its own face, because the hand is actually occupying a space that we cannot see. My body could not literally put my hand through my face, so the rolling motion was the closest physical metaphor I could produce for occupying a higher dimensional space while I was lying down. Even without this later insight, I believed I had glimpsed a higher dimension, and I set out to test that belief. I read everything I could find about higher dimensions, special relativity, and a 19th century novella called Flatland. I kept a notebook and wrote down the events of the night as soon as I could remember them. I returned to those notes repeatedly to make sure I was not reshaping the memory to fit the new ideas I was learning. After weeks of study, I felt confident enough to say that what I had seen was probably a genuine vision of a space beyond the three dimensions we normally inhabit. There are many opinions about what a fourth dimension might be. Some scientists think of it as time, others as a spatial direction we cannot perceive. I do not claim to know the physics. My experience is personal and subjective, and I can only speak about how it felt to me. I also note that there is no solid experimental evidence for dimensions beyond the fourth, although some theoretical models do include them. In a recent television interview, physicist Michio Kaku said, "The mind of God is music resonating in 10-dimensional hyperspace." That line stayed with me. About 3 weeks after I began my reading, I had a vivid dream. In the dream, I was waiting for someone to pick me up from a store that I think was a Walmart. I decided to wander the aisles to pass the time. In a nearby aisle, I heard a baby crying. Suddenly, I felt dizzy, and when the dizziness cleared, I found myself inside the baby's body, lying in the seat of a shopping cart. The world was confusing. I could hear children shouting, but their words were garbled. They were yelling, "Mojo Jojo, Mojo Jojo," the name of the villain monkey from the cartoon Powerpuff Girls. I tried to repeat the words, but the effort made me vomit on myself. A woman pushing the cart bent down to clean me up, and I woke up. I lay in bed, stunned by the oddness of the dream. I got up and walked to the bathroom, planning to return to the bed after I finished. While I was using the bathroom, a memory of an earlier dream surfaced. In that earlier dream, I had woken up, used the bathroom, and then gone back to bed. I did not want to tempt fate, and I was still very tired, so I went back to the bed and laughed at the absurdity of it all. That night, after I fell asleep, I turned on the television and began flipping through channels. The first image I saw was indeed Mojo Jojo. I thought, why not watch it? I do not watch cartoons every night, but after a night full of bizarre dreams involving cartoon characters, I felt it was fitting. The episode I saw was a strange one. Mojo Jojo was hiding behind a group of children who were watching a professor demonstrate a new time travel invention. The professor held a mouse in a maze and explained that the mouse could move only in 2 dimensions: forward, backward, left, right. He said that if the mouse could move upward into the 3rd dimension, it would be able to see the cheese from above and drop down onto it without having to travel through the maze. The professor then said that time is a 4th dimension, and that to travel in time one must leave the 4th dimension and enter a 5th dimension, where one can place oneself at any point in time. Mojo Jojo's plan involved traveling back in time, so when the portal opened, he leapt through it. The scene that followed was rendered in monochrome pencil animation, accompanied by strange synthesizer sounds and a swirling vortex. The cartoon even gave Mojo Jojo a line as he emerged from the 5th dimension. What a trip. I think the writers inserted that line as an inside joke for anyone who had ever taken psychedelics. If you have followed me so far, you can see how the pieces fit together. The order is the original psychedelic experience, the subsequent reading, Dream 1, Dream 2, the events that Dream 2 seemed to predict, and a component of the cartoon that matched a detail from Dream 1. Dream 1 and the cartoon episode share the same name, Mojo Jojo, and both involve a maze-like setting. The aisles of the store in the dream are like the maze in the cartoon. The children shouting Mojo Jojo appear on the screen just after I turned on the television. The higher dimensional analogies spoken by the professor mirrored the ideas I had been studying after the Salvia session. I want to explore the symbolism a little more. The store is a massive building with tall aisles that block the view of the far end, much like the labyrinthine corridors of a maze. We, as shoppers, are like mice running through a maze of shelves, searching for the cheese of desire, the product we want. The baby's cry and the sudden shift into the baby's body represent a loss of orientation, a vertigo that feels like being in a higher dimension, where the notion of up and down no longer applies. The dizziness I felt in the dream is similar to the feeling I described during the Salvia trip when I was rotating in place. In both cases, I was moving through space that I had already occupied, as if I were passing through a wall that I could not see. When I became the baby, I tried to repeat the children's chant, Mojo Jojo, and I vomited. Vomiting is a classic symbol of loss of control, and it happened at the moment I tried to communicate. The baby and the cartoon monkey are both symbols of limited perception. The baby is helpless, cannot speak, cannot move well, and the monkey is a cartoon villain who is often portrayed as ignorant and petty. Both are trying to move in ways that are beyond their ordinary abilities, the baby by being thrust into a higher dimension, the monkey by leaping through a 5th dimensional portal. The scene shows how limited a 3-dimensional being can be when confronted with higher dimensional concepts. A year later, I experienced another series of events that confirmed the pattern I had seen. I took a combination of 2 drugs, the same salvia 10 times, and a dose of ayahuasca, and later dreamed a scenario that mirrored the drug state in symbolic form. Then, an animated television show aired a scene that matched a detail from that dream. The coincidence was striking, and it convinced me that the synchronicity I had felt was real, not just a random coincidence. Dream 2 was simpler. In it, I woke up, went to the bathroom, and returned to bed. The dream unfolded slowly, like a fog lifting as the night gave way to dawn. The dream also hinted at the non-linear nature of time, the way a higher dimensional being might see all moments at once. Thinking about all the crossings and bends in my experience gave me a kind of mental vertigo. It felt as if I were looking at a knot in time, each strand pulling on the others, the knot itself being the synchronicity. Perhaps a true synchronicity is a knot tied by our own hands in the hidden spaces behind the eyes. When I finally saw the connections between the drug experience, the readings, the 2 dreams, and the cartoon episode, a wave of elation washed over me. The feeling reminded me of a passage from Edwin Abbott's Flatland. In that story, a 2-dimensional square, having just been returned to Flatland after a visit from a 3-dimensional sphere, says, "My volition shrinks from the painful task of recalling my humiliation, yet like a second Prometheus I will endure this and worse. If by any means I may arouse in the interiors of plain and solid humanity a spirit of rebellion against the conceit which would limit our dimensions to 2 or 3 or any number short of infinity. Away then with all personal considerations." Those words were written in the Victorian era, yet they speak to a timeless desire to break free from the limits we impose on ourselves. For me, those words capture a sweeping, hopeful view of the world that goes beyond ordinary meaning. They suggest that the universe is not a closed box that we can own, but a vast open space that we can only glimpse. The sensation I felt after the drug sessions was like rising into a pregnant void, stretching and opening, breathing in deeply, and then realizing that I was also being suffocated by the very act of inhaling. That paradox stayed with me. The next morning, after a separate ayahuasca ceremony that was not part of the synchronicity, I went outside and looked at the sky. The sky was so big, so bright, that I felt faint. I was overwhelmed by its immensity and beauty, and also by something deeper that I could not name. That fainting spell was another reminder that the world can be both terrifying in its breadth and soothing in its power. It showed me that after a psychedelic state, the mind can see a world without the usual chains on perception, a world that is both frightening and comforting. It is a world that asks us to face it without fear, using our whole being. In the end, I think of a synchronicity as a multidimensional rose. We may spin ourselves around trying to trace its spiral, but we do not need to see the roots to know that its scent is sweet. The experience taught me that the doors opened by psychedelics do not always close cleanly. They can stay ajar, allowing drafts of memory to wander through the corridors of thought for weeks, months, or even years. Those drafts can bring together books, dreams, cartoons, and everyday moments in ways that feel impossible to explain. They can also bring a sense of wonder that is hard to find in ordinary life.